Is Victoria back? Her hand is raised.
I
Okay, is
think it's a
everyone back? Can
legacy.
we... Okay, thank you. Can we continue?
Yes.
All right, so 2.5 is about scholarly identity as a reader and a writer, what you choose to read and what you choose to write about. Um, so on page 32, 2.5, we have 3 reader identities, okay, which is what we have chosen to read on our own. So if you are given a particular research topic or research area and you want to do a bit of a literature search on it to see how much information is out there, what information you can use, it's you as a reader choosing what to read. Then you have those that have felt obliged to read, those that you are obliged to read. Maybe it was recommended reading from your supervisors. Do you actually do that? Do you recommend certain articles or books that your students need to go and reference or look at so that they have a better understanding of the subject matter? Anyone? So it's aside from us reading our own, what we choose to read, what we information we collect, and then there's also stuff that we are obliged to read, which is maybe a recommended textbook or recommended articles or prescribed textbook, prescribed articles. So this is the obliged reading that you have to do. It's given to you and it's a must for you to do. Then the third one is those that others have obligated um, sorry, the third one is where you were given recommended reading, and the other one is where you felt obligated to actually read it as well. So it's twofold, right? What you want to read, you choose on your own, your free will, and then what is given to you to read, and what you have to read, which is prescribed textbooks and so on. So we're looking at the reading and writing, what determines your scholarly identity in terms of how are you reading, how are you writing, your style of reading, your style of writing. Each postgraduate student and each supervisor brings to the research project his or her own identity as a reader and many kinds of text. While some students will have considerable background knowledge of a certain field, others may be moving to new territory and may be obliged to read certain texts and books suggested by their supervisors or others. Some may do this with enthusiasm, others reluctantly. Some may be grateful for the guidance. Some may be happy to embrace the new territory because sometimes in research we're thrown into the deep end where we don't always know the content. We're going into it much like a a postgraduate student going into it as a novice researcher for the first time. They need a bit of guidance. So sometimes if we are given recommended reading or prescribed reading, it's you're obliged to do it because it's going to guide your journey, it's going to help you in research. Much like I would tell my students, and a lot of them don't do this. So it's an ebook for my honor students, the postgraduate diploma students, and in this ebook that I give them, it's about research methods and design. Okay, so it helps with also the proposal development, which is the first stage that they tackle coming into the program. The writing of the research proposal, developing your topic, uh, looking at the niche area, research gaps, and so on, right? And then this book I found, and I give it to them as a prescribed book because I feel it's going to guide them with how to develop their methodology for the research, right? Some of them choose to read it, some of them don't choose to read it, but you have to. It's a prescribed textbook, and I feel I'm not going to force you, obviously, but I'm putting it out there. Like, I can't make you read something that you don't want to. I can't make you do something you don't want to, right? But at the end of the day, we as supervisors are trying to help you, guide you, support you in this research journey by giving you all these readings to do. You know, um, I've had a supervisor, not a supervisor, but I've heard of a supervisor from a colleague um, who's studying. And this colleague's colleague is doing their PhD. And this supervisor would load this colleague with numerous readings. And my colleague would get so frustrated and come and complain to me. And, much like we do, it's too much of work and there's so much of reading. And, I've got this train of thought. So he was hell bent on, he knew about his subject content. He knew what he was researching, what he wanted to do. And he felt like, him and the supervisor were at loggerheads because supervisor wanted him to go in a specific direction. And obviously his identity wanted to take him, scholarly identity wanted to take him in another direction because this is what he wanted to do. But the supervisor is pushing him to do something else. Now, obviously, sometimes supervisors would have vested interest in that. They would push you in a certain direction because it's for their niche area, not your niche area. So it's for them to produce and for them to publish because it enhances their skills as a researcher, as opposed to enhancing your skills as a student researcher. So they would direct you in that manner. Aside from giving you a research area, a topic to guide you, which some supervisors do. You don't generate your own topic. You go there for help and they were like, but I have this topic. Why don't you try doing that? But it's kind of, like I said, pushing you in a direction that they want you to go in, not in a direction that reflects your own scholarly identity, the direction that you want to go in, if you understand what I'm saying. So you're going to get students that will happen, and you will get supervisors, like I said, that would want you to go in a certain direction that you're not happy with because you know what research you want to do, you know the industry you want to conduct it. And that's also why there is some conflict sometimes with supervisors. And so if we say you're obligated to do certain things, but you don't want to, right? In an ideal academic world, perhaps supervisors will only supervise research within their area of great expertise, but in a reality, many supervisors are expected to supervise outside of their comfort zone, which is true because sometimes there's a lack of capacity, supervision capacity, and then you are expected to supervise outside of your subject area or your field of expertise. So you're kind of thrown in the deep end, but this is where the multidisciplinary comes in, that you have to learn about other disciplines as well. So not just the niche area that you are looking at. Strategies, obviously, for focusing more on student development in their academic writing and reading will be focused on as we move on to Unit 3. And I'm hoping to touch a bit on Unit 3 before we close this session today. So, yeah, looking at you also going outside your comfort zone when you are supervising. And this is, like I said, multidisciplinary aspect of it. You have to learn different fields, not totally outside of your niche area, but within. Writer identities are implicated in many of the vignettes in this unit, but just as students and supervisors have several reader identities, so too do they have writer identities because we all have different styles of writing. An example that's given to you in your text on page 32, a PhD student who had graduated with an MA in creative writing for which she had produced a novel was extremely upset to learn that her draft proposal for the PhD in the field of literacy education was considered by a supervisor to be journalistic and lacked academic rigor. Unpublished supervised journals, right? Um, so she was used to a particular style, so she wrote a novel as opposed to a book publication on an academic level. So the style of writing would have obviously been a bit more different. Also, you have to look at who your reader is. So you're writing for a specific target market. And if she was writing, and we're looking at creative writing skills, and writing a novel, like a storybook, is different from academic and research writing. So obviously, coming into a PhD, um, It wasn't the style that they were looking for. Strategies for assisting students to develop this discipline-specific academic writing literacies, while also making space for other writing literacies, will be presented in Unit 4 and 5. So it's still going to touch on that. So before we move on to 2.6, 2.5, everyone clear on the type of reading and writing? The way we read and interpret and gather information is different from another individual. The way we write is different from what we expect or what your supervisor would expect. Like somebody writing children's stories, doing storybooks would write because it's a different target market. As opposed to when you're writing a PhD, it's a specific target market that's going to read that academic work. Yes, Eureka?
It just came to mind when you were talking about readings given to you to read.
Yeah.
I often try and read them, but if I don't get time, I just skim over them.
Yeah.
But I've had an experience at another university where I did a course, and the supervisor, the lecture was extremely political, and everything we had to do was to one side. And I found that extremely difficult because I always believe there are 2 or 3 or 4, 10 sides to a thing. And he pushed us into one direction, but it was it was a political angle to education.
Yes.
And it was a terrible experience.
And this is what I mentioned when I said the supervisor will steer you in a direction, a different direction from what you thought you wanted to go, because you already, remember, it's your topic, it's your research area, your target market, you know where you want to conduct the study. So you obviously going in a certain direction. So you know what you want to do with your study. And then the supervisor now takes you away from the direction that you want to go in. And this is where I say a lot of the supervisors do this because remember, they are publishing your work, they are supervising your work. So they have to show also their field of expertise, right? So they kind of guide you and move you towards that direction because it's benefiting them to go in a certain direction when there's so many different ways of actually doing it, but it would be to suit their needs as well. Like I mentioned with a colleague, this supervisor was publishing in a certain area, and therefore, because he gave the colleague that particular topic, and it's like, you will follow what I'm telling you to do because you have to go in this direction, my direction. I gave you the topic, and obviously wanted to publish and has published and even sourced out funding for that particular project that this colleague was doing because he made sure he pushed it in his direction. And it ends up being a very ugly journey that you're going to take, much like what you just described, Eureka. Okay, so we have an understanding of the reading and writing academic literacy skills that we need to attain at these various levels. And there's different types of writing and reading and interpreting and so on. It's you as a student or you as a supervisor, how do you read, how do you write in research? Okay, moving on to point 6, your supervisor's identity. Okay, so we looked at the student's identity, scholarly identity. Now we look at you as a supervisor, what you're supposed to do, right? Your response to the activities in this unit may be influenced consciously or subconsciously by your experiences of being supervised or of supervising postgraduate students. Arguing that the relationship between doctoral students and their supervisors impacts on degree completion rates, faculty research performance, and postgraduate satisfaction with their alma mater being the university that they are studying at. Stephen, 2014, explores the impact of supervisors on doctoral students or any graduates who are supervisors themselves. He states that there is often little preparation for the role of supervisor, which requires particular communication skills, personal qualities, and the building of work and personal relationships with that particular doctoral student. One of the key findings of the study is that supervision style emerges as a reaction to both positive and negative experiences as a supervisor, or whatever you have experienced as a supervisor yourself, and being supervised if you are furthering your studies. I'm going to give you an example of that, again touching on my own experiences, right? So how this can impact you both negatively and positively. So before we move on to the framework, what I want to touch on is you are a supervisor, right? And you are supervising maybe post the PG DIP students, honors students, and master's students, right? You're not at the PhD level yet, but you yourself are currently undertaking your own PhD, right? And you are being supervised. So your style of supervision and then how you are being supervised ends up being both a positive and negative experience, in that now you're assuming the role of supervisor and a student at the same time. And then you have someone that's supervising you that has different styles, different techniques, and then you have a different style and technique. And there's going to be a bit of clashing because you think that you know how to supervise. And yes, you do. You know how to supervise those students. But at this doctoral level, maybe that supervisor who's supervising you knows what they're doing. Yes, there will be some gaps. You're not always going to have the perfect scenario where you have the perfect supervisor. Your supervisor is also learning. So this brings me to the experience that I'm having right now, right? So I mentioned I'm doing a second PhD because I'm looking at a more specialized field in quality. My PhD was in engineering management, the first one, right? Then I developed this new one, which is quality engineering, and I'm registered for that, almost done with it. So my supervisor is from the Department of Mechanical and Industrial Engineering, because my department, quality, falls under that school of mechanical and industrial engineering. So I just have one supervisor. I don't have a co-supervisor. My supervisor is actually the vice dean. We're currently the vice dean now. And he told me, right? So now, having supervised students myself, having produced graduates, and we look at outputs when we are supervising, and we want them to finish in a certain amount of time. We want to push our graduate numbers as mentioned in 2.6. So these are all the criteria that we're looking at. So when we're supervising, it's not only how the student writes, but with an interest of you have to finish in a year or you have to finish in 2 years, depending on whether it's full time or part time. Whether it's a master's, you've got 2 years, PhD, you've got 5 years. So um, we're looking at graduate output, performance of the student as well. So my supervisor tells me that you're an associate professor, you know, you've done a PhD before. He's done minimal supervision on me because he assumes I don't need to be supervised because I've graduated so many students. I'm sitting at this level. But sometimes, even though you're sitting at this level, it doesn't mean you don't need to be supervised. Just because I've been a supervisor myself and I've graduated so many students, whether at master's, whether at PhD level, I need some guidance also. And he didn't realize that until I brought it to his attention. And then there's also, so on a statistical standpoint, a lot of my research is hypothesis testing, right? Because I come from quantitative analysis background. And we're using this new package, which is called PLSM, which is partial least square modeling, right? As opposed to the normal multi-regression modeling that you would use when you're testing for hypothesis, right? And it's a new package to me. It's a new package to the supervisor, not realizing he needed to guide me a little more, but he himself didn't know the package. We had to now get StatCon. For those of you that are familiar with UJ's processes, we had to get StatCon, someone to come in from StatCon to actually help us now, because we both went into this blinded. We want to use this new package, do the statistical analysis, but we don't know much about it. So this is where we fail to understand that I don't know everything, he doesn't know everything, where we had to bring a third person in to now actually help us, which was a statistician, because I'm at the point where I'm analyzing my results right now. So this is, like I said, you think because we are supervising students, and then when we are the student ready to be supervised, you think, okay, we know, he assumed I just know everything. No, you need that guidance sometimes. We don't always, I always come down to saying that, we don't always know everything. We learning, and you learn from your supervisor. There may be gaps in his supervision or her supervision. You learn from your own type of supervision style. There may be gaps and stuff there that your student will obviously have a negative experience with. Everyone with me? Can we move on to this framework? Okay, I'm seeing no hands up, so let's move on. So after reviewing literature and research supervision, interviewing 12 experienced and inexperienced doctoral supervisors from a range of disciplines of universities in the UK, be nice to do a practice of it in South Africa, testing face validity of her concepts with a small number of PhD students. So face validity is where it's much like a peer review. So you give somebody your study to review it, right? And they take it for face value. So face validity is when they are reading and peer reviewing your work. Lee developed a framework of concepts for research supervision, which she considers to be a discipline neutral and which is included in Philpott's 2015 framework. This framework will be used in assignments for the unit of the model. So it will be used for, we're moving on to assignment 2. You still have assignment 1, which you also have to complete, right? So in this framework, I'm not sure how clear it is, but you can also follow on in your notes if you have printed it out. The framework for concepts of research supervision, where you have functional supervision, enculturation, critical thinking, emancipation, and relationship development. And what is the supervisor's role throughout those different stages of research supervision? What are the knowledge and skills that the supervisor is supposed to have throughout the stages of development as a supervisor? And what do you expect in return from the student to gain at those various stages? Which takes us to assignment 2. Write 1,000 to 1,200 word reflective essay in which you, as a supervisor, identify the categories that describes aspects of your practice and identities as a supervisor of these postgraduate students, developing their academic literacy practices. Explain why these categories apply to you and your ways of supervising. So, for example, the first one being functional, where you issuing issue is on managing the project, developing a project plan, and so on. What is supposed to happen as a supervisor level is, what do you do as a supervisor, where it says rational progression through tasks. That is where you draw this research plan or this project plan of how the stages of the student's research should go, right? Your knowledge and skills as a supervisor at this stage, I'm only looking at the functional stage, which is, if you can see my cursor, just this first one. You need to direct, guide, and support the management at that project, which means that you need to have those skills in order to support the student and guide the student. What is the student supposed to do at this stage? They're supposed to have a bit more discipline, obedience, and organization, because you're following a specific, or you're drawing and following this project plan. I always, during my supervision, I make sure when the student registers and they're coming into the system and they already have partial proposal done, because our faculty is supposed to have a proposal when you are applying for, when you're doing the application for master's and doctoral studies. So they have part of that proposal done, and then we come in, when you registered, we're refining that proposal. So it's not only at the proposal stage, I make them draw up a project plan right up till the time that they are going to do their final write-up of the whole project. And I tell students, you have to have a time frame or time limit in mind, because when you registered, for example, for this master's, you knew that you had a certain time or goal in which you needed to complete this master's. So let's work backwards. So if you registered 2024 and you want to finish in October 2025, work backwards from October 2025 and draw me a project plan showing me the steps and the dates and how long the time frame it's going to take you to complete each of these activities, from proposal and then getting the proposal accepted at faculty higher degrees, doing your literature search, doing your drafting the data collection tools, applying for ethical clearance, which is part of the process, ethical clearance on the data collection method and the tool, and take them through the stages, put dates allocated to it, how long it's going to take you, a month from this date to this date, 2 months from this date to this date. So that's how I work with my students. So on that first one, being the functionality, this is what you're basically doing. Your responsibility as a supervisor and the responsibility of your student. So the first one for assignment 1 is identifying the categories that describe you, right? And what you would do in your ways of supervising. All right. Okay, it's much clearer at the bottom of assignment 2. Then you have, do your practices vary according to the student with whom you are working and according to the stage of their product? If they do, describe how they vary and why. And if they do not vary, explain why not. So in this question now, we have different students and they have different phases and paces at which they work. Sometimes you have to chase these students to get them to do the work. Others you don't, because they're hands-on, they're doing the work, they're submitting, right? So do you have students that are like this? You are a supervisor right now. Do you have students at various development stages of their project, and how you handle working with them? What are the practices that you use? Because you're not going to have the same practice for every student. Each individual works at their own pace and they have their own way of um, writing and doing stuff and planning themselves, organizing. Like with me, I'm not a very organized person, even though I try to get my students to be organized. My mind is a bit of chaos. So sometimes I try to make checklists and then I throw those checklists out, and then end up doing my own thing, but still getting the work done, but not in a very organized fashion, right? Very haphazard, but gets done. Yet I'm teaching my students and I'm supervising them on how to have a proper project plan so they are more organized. Yet I don't really practice that myself. So, like I said, different practices for different students because yourself are not practicing that, right? And then the third one, for bonus credits, are all of your practices captured in this framework? If not, briefly describe what practices that you have that can be included in this framework. So, for example, you may not be functional or enculturation. Um, you don't do critical thinking, emancipation. Maybe don't adopt this. You have other practices. Include what you think should be there. And as a supervisor, what is your role? As a student, what is their role? And what needs to be done at every level? Think you can handle that? Well, the remainder of today, you're going to be sitting with your assignment 1 and assignment 2. If you can sit together in groups, this whole group, form another team's meeting and sit with it so the day is not wasted. All right. And then it gives you instructions on your rubric and how you're going to be assessed for assignment 2, total of 15 marks. So how you can get your marks. Any questions up until this point? And then I can move on briefly to Unit 3. Any hands up? No questions, no comments.
No, we are stunned by all the work.
Okay, so do you want me to stop here so that you can do those assignment 1 and 2 and do all the activities for the remainder of today? But I'm trusting you to all somebody in this group and include everyone. I don't know if others are going to attend. There's 2 more students, but they're not here. Have a group session. deal with the unit 1, unit 2, activities 1, activity 2. And then when I see you on next week, Saturday, we go through unit 3 and 4.
That makes sense for me because I now have to go and start with session 1, which I missed. So I'm starting there today.
Okay, Tony and Victoria can assist you. So basically what I'm tasking you all to do is, because I don't want to go into unit 3 and then it's information overload and you guys haven't done the exercises previously, then you get better understanding, more knowledgeable, and then we go into unit 3. Because now I'm just going to be overloading you with information.
Yeah, Prof, I'm in agreement also because we are missing the other 2 students. I think it'll give them a chance then to not miss out on too much.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's what I'm also thinking. Okay, so here on
Prof, sorry,
Yes,
I'm also in
Victoria.
agreement to what my colleague has just mentioned now. Let's
Perfect.
go ahead and do the summit 1 and 2, then wait for others to join us next
Okay.
week.
Perfect. So I'm glad that all of you are in agreement. So Tony, can I task you with this now? Set up a Teams. I'm sure you have, there was an email that came with everybody's email addresses, right? Set up another Teams link for today. Maybe guys take a break until 10:30, resume at 11 or whatever time you want to set it up for. Start your own group now on Teams, or however you want to do it. You can even have a WhatsApp group, but I think more visual, where you can present work and talk to each other on Teams. So Tony, if you can just set that up with all the students in your class that you have access to their emails, and then yeah, you can include me. So in between traveling, I can pop in and out of lectures. And in and out of that session, maybe set it until 4 p.m. You can go in and out, have your breaks, but have it set up so that we know, you guys are working with each other, and then also include me on the invite and I will pop in and out
All right,
after I've
Prof.
traveled.
I'll set it up. Not a problem.
Okay, perfect. Right. So help each other with all the activities, and you've got assignment 1 and assignment 2. I'm happy with that. Perfect. All right, guys. So thank you so much. Go ahead, do that. Take your break now. Get set with your assignments. Set up your day, and session will obviously end at about 4 or wherever you get tired, right? But allow yourselves breaks in between. Thank you all so much. I'm going to get ready and leave for the airport at 11. All right, Tony. So you
All
in
right, Prof.
charge as a
Not a
class
problem.
rep for the
Not a
remainder of
problem.
today. Okay. Perfect. Thank you so much. Take care, guys. All the best.
Travel safe, Prof. All the best with your,
Thank you.
conference.
Bye.
Bye.